You are already dead. You just don't know it yet. You arrived sometime in the night, perhaps by ship into the port of Ostia, perhaps on foot through the Via Appia. And now, as the first gray light of dawn seeps over the 7 hills, you are standing at the edge of the greatest city on Earth, and the city is already deciding what to do with you. The smell hits you first, not the marble, not the temples. The smell, a compound assault of rotting organic matter, burning wood, unwashed bodies, animal dung, and the particular sweetness of decay that no historian has ever found a polite way to describe. This is Rome. Population 1 million. Life expectancy, not your concern for much longer. The streets are narrow in ways that defy modern imagination. Not quaint narrow, not charming narrow, claustrophobically, dangerously narrow, the kind of narrow where 2 loaded carts cannot pass each other, and where the walls of the buildings on either side lean toward each other, overhead like conspirators sharing a secret. Those buildings are called insulae, apartment blocks 5, 6, 7 stories tall, constructed from wood and fired brick by landlords whose primary architectural qualification was the desire to stack as many rent-paying bodies as possible into the smallest footprint of Earth. They swayed in strong wind. They caught fire with alarming frequency. They collapsed without warning, sometimes taking entire blocks with them, sometimes simply dropping a floor or 2 into the street below while the remaining residents slept on, too exhausted or too resigned to relocate. The Roman architect Vitruvius, writing in the 1st century before the Common Era, described the insulae of Rome with barely concealed horror, noting that the city's appetite for height had long outpaced its capacity for structural integrity. The Emperor Augustus eventually capped building height at roughly 21 meters, not out of any particular concern for human life, but because the fires were becoming politically inconvenient. You are walking now because standing still in a Roman street is its own variety of suicide. The traffic in Rome moved at night. Julius Caesar himself had banned wheeled vehicles from the city during daylight hours in an attempt to manage the chaos, which means that as dawn breaks, the carts and wagons that have been grinding through the streets all night are still making their final deliveries, and they will not stop for you. The drivers are tired, the animals are tired, and you are a soft obstacle in a city that has no philosophical objection to running soft obstacles down. The satirist Juvenal, who documented Roman street life with the bitter precision of a man who had lost several arguments with cart axles, wrote that a man who went out to dinner without first composing his will was dangerously optimistic. He was not exaggerating. He was barely keeping up. The street is not a place you pass through in Rome. It is a gauntlet you survive, 1 block at a time, with no guarantee that the next block will be kinder than the last. Above you, the windows are opening. This is the moment of maximum danger if you have not already learned to walk close to the center of the street, away from the building facades. Roman insulae had no plumbing above the ground floor. What this means, in practical terms, is that everything that needed to be disposed of, everything, was disposed of through the window, into the street below, at whatever hour the disposing party found convenient. There were laws against this. There were always laws in Rome. The Romans had a genius for legislation that was matched only by their genius for ignoring it when inconvenient. The great legal compilation known as the Digest contains specific provisions regarding liability for objects thrown from windows onto pedestrians below. The fact that these provisions were codified in law tells you everything you need to know about how common the problem was. If you are lucky, what falls on you is water. If you are not lucky, and in Rome, luck was a goddess with a famously short attention span, you will spend your first morning in the eternal city doing something that no travel account has ever glamorized. And yet there is something else happening in these streets, something that the smell and the noise and the falling refuse cannot entirely obscure. Rome is alive in a way that no city before it has ever been alive. The bakeries, there are nearly 300 of them inside the city walls, are opening their shutters, and the smell of bread joins the compound assault on your senses, and for a moment, it is almost beautiful. The Thermopolia, the Roman equivalent of street food counters built directly into the facades of buildings, with their characteristic stone counters and ceramic pots sunk into the stone to keep food warm, are already serving the morning crowd, because most Romans have no kitchen, no means of cooking in their cramped insulae apartments, and the street is their dining room. The noise of commerce, of argument, of children, of animals, of a city of 1 million people waking simultaneously is staggering in its intensity and oddly, stubbornly magnificent. You are in Rome. The city wants to kill you. It is also, undeniably, the most extraordinary place human civilization has yet produced. The aqueducts are what make this paradox possible. 11 major aqueducts feed Rome by the height of the imperial period, delivering roughly 1 million cubic meters of water into the city every single day, more water per capita than most European cities would manage until the 20th century. The engineering is not merely impressive, it is an act of almost arrogant ambition. Water dragged from sources 40 kilometers distant and delivered through gravity alone, through channels and tunnels and the iconic arching structures that still stand in the Italian countryside, like monuments to the proposition that what seems technically impossible is merely a problem of sufficient motivation. The same civilization that perfected the aqueduct also used that water to dilute the public fountains that served the 90% of Romans who had no private water supply. The same fountains that received runoff from streets that were also open sewers, because the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Drain, handled the waste of the wealthy districts and left the insulae neighborhoods to manage as best they could. Rome gave you genius and squalor in the same gesture, with the same hands, often on the same morning. By the time the sun has cleared the hills and the shadows have retreated from the Forum, you have navigated perhaps 6 blocks. You have been jostled by a crowd, narrowly avoided a cart, stepped in something you have chosen not to examine closely, and been assessed by the eyes of a city that categorizes every human being it encounters within approximately 3 seconds of visual contact. In Rome, how you are seen is not a matter of vanity. It is a matter of survival. The toga marks a Roman citizen. The absence of a toga marks everything else: slave, freedman, foreigner, threat, opportunity, or irrelevance. You are wearing what you are wearing, and Rome has already decided what that means. And what it means will determine whether the next person you encounter speaks to you, ignores you, or does something considerably less pleasant. You have been in the city for less than an hour. You have not yet eaten. You have not yet found shelter. You have not yet understood, fully and physically, in the way that only proximity to genuine danger can teach, what it means to live inside a system that was not built for you, that was not, in any meaningful sense, built for most of the people inside it. That understanding is coming. Rome has all the time in the world. You, almost certainly, do not. Before you take another step, you need to understand something. Something that no amount of studying maps or memorizing emperors' names will have prepared you for. In Rome, you are not a person. You are a category. And the category you occupy was assigned to you before you opened your mouth, before you offered a greeting, before you had any opportunity to demonstrate intelligence, competence, courage, or virtue. Rome looked at you the moment you entered its streets and placed you somewhere in a hierarchy so ancient, so deeply embedded in the legal and social architecture of the city, that questioning it would have seemed to most Romans roughly as sensible as questioning the position of the sun. The hierarchy was not merely custom. It was law. It was theology. It was the organizing principle of the most powerful civilization the Western world had ever produced, and it would determine with mechanical precision nearly every material condition of your existence from this morning until the day you died. At the apex stood the senatorial class, the great aristocratic families whose wealth was measured in land, whose influence was measured in political alliances stretching back generations, and whose daily lives unfolded in a dimension of comfort and privilege so remote from the experience of ordinary Romans that they might as well have inhabited a different city entirely. Below them, the equestrian order, wealthy, educated, politically engaged, but separated from the senatorial elite by a boundary as invisible and as absolute as a wall of stone. Then the ordinary Roman citizens, free-born, legally protected, entitled to vote in the assemblies, and to wear the toga that announced their status to every pair of eyes on the street. Then the freedmen, former slaves who had been manumitted, who carried the permanent social stigma of their former condition, regardless of whatever wealth or influence they subsequently accumulated. Then the slaves themselves, who constituted somewhere between 20 and 30% of Rome's total population, who had no legal personhood whatsoever, who could be bought, sold, beaten, killed, or sexually exploited at the discretion of their owners, and whose testimony in court was admissible only if it had been extracted under torture, because Roman law held that a slave could not be trusted to tell the truth voluntarily. And beneath even the slaves, in some practical senses, the urban poor, technically free, technically citizens in many cases, but without property, without patronage, without the social connections that transformed legal status into actual power, surviving on the margins of a city that needed their labor and despised their poverty simultaneously. You arrived without a patron. This is your first and most consequential mistake. The patronage system, the web of formal relationships between powerful Romans and their social inferiors, the clients who called upon their patrons each morning at the salutatio, the dawn ritual of attendance in which hundreds of dependent men gathered outside the houses of the wealthy to pay their respects and receive in return small gifts, legal protection, social endorsement, or simple acknowledgement of their existence, was not merely a feature of Roman social life, it was the infrastructure. Without a patron, you had no advocate in court, no reference for employment, no one to speak your name in rooms where names determined outcomes. Without a patron, you were navigating the most complex social ecosystem in the ancient world, without a map, without a guide, and without the single credential that Roman society recognized above all others: the endorsement of someone who already mattered. The toga, which you do not own, would have told the street everything it needed to know about you in an instant. Roman dress was not fashion. It was a uniform, legally prescribed and socially enforced, a walking declaration of status that allowed Rome's rigid hierarchy to make itself legible at a glance. The pure white toga of the full Roman citizen, the toga with the broad purple stripe of the senator, the toga with the narrow purple stripe of the equestrian, the darker, undyed woolen garments of the working poor, the tunics and foreign dress of the enslaved and the non-citizen. Every body on the street was a text, and every Roman read that text fluently and instantly and responded accordingly. If you were wearing something that did not correspond to a recognized category, if your dress was ambiguous, foreign, or simply wrong in ways that announced your ignorance, the response would range from cold dismissal to active hostility, because ambiguity in a system built on categorical clarity was not charming. It was threatening. Consider what it meant to be a slave in this city, not because your own situation is necessarily that extreme, but because understanding the bottom of the hierarchy illuminates the logic of the entire structure. Roman slavery was not a temporary condition, not a misfortune that carried with it any expectation of eventual remedy. It was a legal state that extinguished personhood as completely as death, that transferred all rights over a human body, its labor, its movement, its reproduction, its very life, to another human being who was constrained in the exercise of those rights by almost nothing except the economic calculation that a dead slave was a financial loss. Slaves built the aqueducts you admired this morning. Slaves ground the grain in the bakeries whose smell briefly made the city seem almost livable. Slaves rowed the ships that carried the empire's commerce, carried the litters of the wealthy through the streets you are walking, cooked the food in the houses you cannot enter, and were buried in unmarked graves in the necropoli outside the city walls, while their owners received elaborate funerary monuments, celebrating virtues that had been maintained, in large part, through the invisible labor of people whose names history did not think worth recording. And yet, and this is the cold irony that Rome forces you to sit with, the system worked, not for you, not for the slave, not for the freedman whose legal freedom was a technicality that social reality ignored. It worked for Rome. It worked with a terrible efficiency that produced the roads, the law, the literature, the architecture, the military dominance that would shape Western civilization for the next 2,000 years. The hierarchy was not a flaw in the Roman system. It was the Roman system. The same structure that would crush you if you fell on the wrong side of its categories was the structure that organized the collective effort of 1 million people into something that functioned, that expanded, that endured for centuries beyond what any reasonable assessment of its contradictions should have allowed. You are standing in the street this morning, uncertain of your status, uncertain of your safety, uncertain of nearly everything. And somewhere above you, in the cool atrium of a house you will never be invited to enter, a man who has never once questioned whether the world was arranged correctly is eating his breakfast, attended by people who have no choice but to serve him, in a city that was built, stone by stone, on the certainty that some lives are simply worth more than others. Rome did not apologize for this. Rome did not need to. Rome was Rome, and you, whatever you are, wherever you came from, are something considerably less. By the time you are hungry enough to care, Rome has already taught your body a lesson. Hunger here is not a gentle thing. It is not the romantic, almost theatrical hunger of a traveler who has missed one meal and expects to be rewarded with a better one. Roman hunger is administrative. It is the body reminding you that civilization has been built around people who are allowed to eat first and people who are allowed to eat later, if at all. If you are poor, if you are working, if you are enslaved, if you are one of the thousands of bodies packed into the upper floors of the city, then food is not a pleasure waiting at the end of the day. It is a logistical problem with moral consequences. And in Rome, even the act of eating can become a test of whether you belong to the world or merely survive inside it. The first mistake modern people make about Roman food is imagining abundance. They picture feasts, silver platters, peacocks, dormice, wine flowing like a river, and emperors inventing absurd dishes to prove they could. That image exists, but it belongs to a tiny fraction of Rome and obscures the far larger reality of the city. Most Romans lived on a narrow, repetitive diet built around grain, legumes, vegetables, olive oil, and whatever cheap proteins could be secured without too much expense. Bread was central, not as an accompaniment, but as the architecture of survival. Porridge still mattered. Pulse, the ancient grain-based staple, remained common among the poor. The urban body in Rome was fed by mills, by bakeries, by markets, by hand-to-mouth arithmetic, and by an economy that could deliver spectacle to the elite while leaving millions of mouths dependent on whatever could be bought cheaply enough that day. And even the bread is not innocent. Grain in Rome passed through a chain of labor so brutal and so ordinary that most people barely noticed it. It was harvested in provinces far from the city, transported under imperial control, milled by laborers whose work was relentless and often enslaved, then baked in massive communal ovens that turned flour into the most basic promise of civic stability. But grain was not always clean. Mills were abrasive, stones wore down. Tiny fragments of stone, grit, and sand entered the flour. Teeth in the ancient world wore out early for a reason that modern people rarely understand until they look directly at the mechanics of ancient food production. When a Roman bit into bread, he was not always biting into a soft emblem of domestic comfort. He may have been chewing through a slow accumulation of minerals and damage, eating the infrastructure of his own survival. Then there is the matter of garum, the sauce that has become a joke in modern retellings and was, for Romans, an obsession. Garum was fermented fish sauce, produced by allowing fish entrails and salt to break down under heat until the resulting liquid could be strained, bottled, and shipped across the empire. To a Roman palate, it was not a novelty. It was a seasoning, a cultural constant, a marker of taste and status that could be cheap or luxurious depending on quality. To a modern nose, it sounds like a punishment. Imagine the scent of decay made marketable. Imagine a city so accustomed to transforming what would disgust us into something edible that the boundary between nourishment and rot becomes less a line than a negotiation. Rome did that constantly. It took waste, labor, violence, and distance and converted them into a meal. The miracle is not that garum existed. The miracle is that an empire could turn decomposition into commerce and call it refinement. If you are lucky, you are not eating garum from a roadside stall whose sauce has been sitting in the sun too long. If you are unlucky, you are. The Thermopolium, that open-fronted street food shop with its stone counter and embedded jars, is where much of the city eats its daily fuel. There is no dining room in the modern sense, no privacy, no elaborate ritual. You step up to a counter, perhaps shoulder to shoulder with laborers, porters, freedmen, travelers, and the occasional slave sent to fetch food for a household that does not bother to serve itself. The dishes are practical, not aspirational. Stews, bread, olives, beans, cheap fish, eggs if available. Wine diluted with water, often heavily, because drinking it straight was not considered civilized. And in the better parts of the city, in the houses of the wealthy, the meal may be more elaborate, more theatrical, more layered with imported luxuries and social performance. But even there, the body remains vulnerable to something the Romans never fully escaped: contamination. Contamination is the silent partner in every Roman meal. Water carried the city's genius and its danger at the same time. Public fountains fed from aqueducts supplied clean-looking water in theory, but storage, handling, and proximity to waste guaranteed that purity was always partial and temporary. Food spoiled quickly in the heat. Meat was expensive and not always fresh. Markets sold what they could, not what was ideal. Preserved foods helped, but preservation was only ever a compromise between hunger and risk. And this is before you account for lead, one of Rome's most elegant poisons. Lead pipes carried water in some contexts. Lead-glazed vessels were used in others. The sweetening of wine with lead compounds has been debated for generations, but the broader point is unchanged. Rome was a civilization that normalized contact with substances that slowly damaged the body while giving it the illusion of luxury. You could be fed and poisoned at the same time, and often no one would consider that contradiction strange. For the poor, the meal was often not about taste at all. It was about continuity. One day to the next, one loaf to the next, one ration to the next. The annona, the grain dole distributed to Roman citizens, was one of the great mechanisms by which the state held the city together, and one of the clearest signs that Rome understood bread better than it understood justice. Feed the crowd and it will remain manageable. Starve the crowd and it will become a political problem. So the state fed it, selectively and strategically, Because famine in a city this size would not be merely a tragedy, it would be an uprising. But the grain dole did not end hunger. It managed it. It arranged it. It made starvation less visible in the streets while preserving the hierarchy that made some people eat before others. Rome was never interested in equality. It was interested in stability. There is a particular cruelty in that fact, because food should be the most human of acts. It should be the one place where rank collapses and need becomes universal. In Rome, even that was partitioned. The elite reclined on couches in triclinium dining rooms and performed abundance as a form of political theater. They imported oysters, dates, exotic spices, game birds, and delicacies from the edges of the empire, not because they needed them, but because access itself was a proof of power. A dinner table in the right household was a demonstration that Rome could command the world and serve it back to itself on a platter. Meanwhile, the laborer outside the door stood in line for a cheap meal that might have been cooked in an unclean vessel by someone just as exhausted as he was. The same city, the same afternoon, the same species. The distance between them was not taste, it was law. So when you finally eat in Rome, do not imagine comfort. Imagine negotiation. Imagine a body deciding whether it can afford to be grateful for what it has been given. Imagine the mouth accepting bread that may be gritty, a stew that may be thin, olives that may be too salty, wine that must be diluted because no one trusts what Rome gives without cutting it first. This is not the menu of a forgotten past. This is the daily arithmetic of survival in a city that could feed 1 million and still leave the majority one missed delivery away from desperation. Rome did not starve because it lacked capacity. It starved because its capacity was organized around power. And if you think that eating there would have been simple, you have already misunderstood the city. Even the meal is a warning. Even the table is part of the trap. Your body is now the battlefield. Rome has assaulted your senses, categorized your status, rationed your food, and now it turns its attention to the fragile machinery inside your skin. The same city that engineered aqueducts capable of sustaining 1 million people also allowed human waste to flow openly in the streets, where children played and where drinking water was drawn from fountains that received the same runoff. Hygiene in Rome was not a moral failing or a cultural oversight. It was a structural inevitability. The insulae, where most people lived, had no indoor plumbing beyond the ground floor, no systematic waste removal, no concept of germ theory, and no consistent access to clean water for anything beyond drinking. Bathing existed, but it was public, communal, and more social ritual than genuine sanitation. Your skin, your mouth, your lungs, your digestive tract, all of them are now conducting a war against an environment that wants to colonize you from the inside out. The public baths offer the illusion of cleanliness, but the reality is considerably more complex. The great thermae, the baths of Caracalla, the baths of Diocletian, were architectural triumphs, vast complexes of heated pools, exercise yards, libraries, and gardens that could accommodate thousands simultaneously. But they were also reservoirs of shared filth. The water circulated continuously but was never fully refreshed. Sweats, oils, skin cells, and organic matter accumulated in the pools, creating a warm, humid environment perfect for bacterial growth. Romans scraped their skin with strigils, curved metal tools that removed dirt and oil mixed with olive oil, then rinsed in the baths. The practice was effective up to a point, but the communal of the baths meant that every body brought its own microbial population to the water. You enter seeking purity and emerge carrying traces of everyone who bathed before you. Disease moves faster than you can imagine in this density. Rome's population density was unprecedented, roughly 50,000 people per square kilometer in the crowded core districts, far exceeding what any pre-industrial city had previously sustained. Tuberculosis thrived in the damp, poorly ventilated insulae. Malaria was endemic, carried by mosquitoes breeding in the stagnant marshes near the Tiber and in the standing water that accumulated wherever the city's drainage failed. Dysentery followed every contaminated meal, every sip from a public fountain downstream from an open sewer. Infant mortality hovered near 50%, not because Roman parents loved their children less, but because the infant body was uniquely vulnerable to dehydration, infection, and the malnutrition that weakened every immune response. Half of all children died before their 5th birthday. The other half considered themselves lucky. Roman medicine meets this reality with confidence bordering on arrogance. The physician Galen, practicing in the 2nd century, would dissect animals and announce discoveries about human anatomy that were more imaginative than accurate. Hippocratic theory still dominated. The 4 humors of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile needed to be kept in balance, and any imbalance required intervention. Bloodletting was the universal response to fever, inflammation, or almost any condition where the physician felt the need to demonstrate activity. Leeches were applied, veins were opened, the body was drained until it weakened further or occasionally recovered on its own. Bleeding made intuitive sense to a culture that understood neither circulation nor infection, but it turned every illness into a race between the disease and the treatment. Sometimes the cure killed before the sickness had a chance. Wounds were another matter entirely. Roman military medicine was genuinely advanced. Field surgeons could amputate limbs under battlefield conditions and achieve survival rates that would impress modern trauma teams. Tourniquets, ligatures, and basic antiseptics made from vinegar and wine were standard, but civilian medicine lacked this rigor. Urban wounds, cuts from glass in the street, burns from cooking fires, infections from splinters or rusty metal were treated with poultices of honey, vinegar, pigeon dung, or mixtures of herbs whose efficacy was dubious at best. Galen prescribed ground viper flesh for tuberculosis. Celsus recommended the ashes of a burnt mouse for ear infections. The same culture that measured the orbit of planets also trusted that a diet of crushed beetles could cure fever. Medicine in Rome was not entirely useless. It was simply unreliable, often harmful, and almost always a gamble. Oral hygiene was almost non-existent beyond the elite. Toothbrushes did not exist. Toothpicks made from feathers or wood were used by those who could afford the time. Tooth powders, when available, often contained abrasive materials that wore down enamel faster than they cleaned it. Dental decay was common, abscesses were agonizing, and extraction was the only treatment for advanced decay. The gritty bread you ate this morning accelerates the damage. Lead acetate, used to sweeten wine, quietly poisons the nervous system over time. Chronic exposure to heavy metals from cookware, pipes, and cosmetics left Roman bodies carrying a toxic load that modern forensic archaeology can still detect in skeletal remains. You are not merely surviving Rome. You are accumulating damage from every surface you touch, every breath you take, every meal you swallow. Pregnancy and childbirth offered no mercy. Roman women gave birth at home, attended by midwives whose training varied widely and whose success rates were never systematically tracked. Pains were managed with opium or henbane when available, but infection was the great reaper. Postpartum fever killed mothers whose tears were considered an acceptable price for the children who survived. Contraception existed but was unreliable. Silphium, an herbal contraceptive, was harvested to extinction by the 1st century. Abortion was legal but dangerous, involving poisons or physical trauma that often destroyed the mother as well as the pregnancy. The infant that survived birth faced the additional gauntlet of wet nurses, poor nutrition, and the diseases that preyed on unweaned children. Reproduction in Rome was not a celebration. It was a lottery with terrible odds. Mental health, as we would call it, was not a concept Rome recognized. What we call depression, anxiety, or PTSD appeared as melancholy, cowardice, or divine disfavor. Stoicism offered philosophical tools for endurance, but these were elite consolations for men who could afford leisure to contemplate their souls. The urban poor had no such luxury. Chronic stress, sleep deprivation from noisy insulae, hunger, violence, and powerlessness ground down the psyche as relentlessly as disease ground down the body. Alcoholism was widespread. Opium was available to those who could afford it. Suicide was frequent enough that philosophers debated its morality without surprise. Rome built public spectacles to distract from private despair. But distraction is not healing. It is delay. Hygiene, medicine, and survival in Rome were never separate from status. The wealthy had private physicians, imported remedies, country estates to escape plague seasons. Slaves and the poor relied on folk remedies, public assistance when it existed, and the body's own resilience. Life expectancy at birth was 20 to 25 years, but this statistic hides a brutal truth. Most deaths occurred in childhood. If you survived to adulthood, you might reach 40 or 50, scarred by infections, weakened by malnutrition, and carrying the cumulative toll of a lifetime spent breathing Rome's air. The city was not merely dangerous, it was degenerative. Every day you spent inside its walls was a subtraction from the total sum of your vitality, a slow theft accomplished through engineering triumphs and human neglect working in concert. Justice in Rome wears a toga. It speaks Latin. It belongs to people whose ancestors fought at Zama and whose descendants will dine with governors. You are standing in a street that smells of urine and fresh bread, wearing clothes that mark you as an outsider, carrying no patron's name worth mentioning, and the law has already assessed you. Roman law is the foundation of Western jurisprudence, the 12 Tables, the Institutes of Gaius, Justinian's Digest, a legal architecture so sophisticated, so enduring, that its echoes still shape courtrooms 2,000 years later. But that sophistication was never intended for you. It was built to protect property, to stabilize hierarchies, to make the empire legible to itself, from Hadrian's Wall to the sands of Mesopotamia. The law is Rome's greatest achievement and its most efficient weapon. And if you find yourself on the wrong side of its categories, it will dismantle you with a precision that feels almost elegant. The forum buzzes with activity, but this is not a place of impartial justice. It is a theater where status determines the script. A citizen brings a complaint against his freedman neighbor over a property boundary. The magistrate listens, nods, consults a scroll. The freedman speaks, but his words carry less weight because his past as property still lingers in the room like an odor no one mentions. Slaves cannot testify against their masters unless tortured first, because Roman law assumes their testimony is inherently unreliable unless pain has stripped away their capacity for deception. The citizen wins, the freedman pays. The crowd watches, learning the lesson Rome teaches daily. The law exists to preserve what already exists. If you have nothing to preserve, the law has little interest in preserving you. Debt is where the system reveals its teeth. If you owe money and cannot pay, the law grants your creditor extraordinary powers. The Lex Poetalia Pauperia of the 3rd century before the Common Era abolished the most brutal forms of debt bondage. But creditors could still seize your person, hold you in private confinement, or sell you into slavery across the sea if you were not a citizen. Roman prisons were not state institutions for criminals. They were private spaces where wealthy creditors confined debtors until payment or ransom appeared. No habeas corpus existed, no right to counsel, no prohibition against chains. You could vanish into a creditor's basement for months, years, fed just enough to keep you alive for labor, your existence known only to those who profited from your captivity. The law called this justice. It called it contract enforcement. Crime itself was stratified by status. A patrician who killed a plebeian faced lighter punishment than the reverse. The Lex Cornelia de Sicarius et Beneficis punished murder, but enforcement depended on who the victim was and who the killer served. Slaves who killed their masters faced collective punishment. The entire household could be executed, crucified, or scattered to mines. The Emperor Domitian once ordered 2,000 spectators killed when a slave poisoned his master during a theater performance. Poison was the slave's weapon and the elite's terror because slaves had access to food, drink, cosmetics, every intimate surface of power. The law responded with terror of its own, turning suspicion into slaughter, turning one crime into mass execution. Justice was never blind. It had very good eyes for social rank. Punishment was public, designed not merely to deter but to instruct. Flogging for minor offenses, calibrated by status. Citizens received fewer lashes, slaves received them until the whipmaster tired. Exile for political crimes among the elite, a dignified removal to a pleasant villa on an island. Crucifixion for slaves and non-citizens, a slow death displayed along roadsides as a living billboard of imperial power. The Emperor Constantine would abolish crucifixion in the 4th century, but for centuries it defined Roman terror. 3 days to die, sometimes longer, legs broken to hasten suffocation, the body left for birds while travelers passed in silence or applause. The cross was not merely execution. It was architecture, 12 feet of wood teaching every onlooker what happened to those who tested the hierarchy. The courtroom itself reveals the rigged game. Accusation required no evidence beyond the accuser's word if the accused was low status. Slaves testified under torture, the rack, hot irons, waterboarding avant la lettre, because truth required suffering to be credible. Citizens could be tortured under extreme circumstances, but only after conviction, and only to extract further information. The advocate system favored the connected. Cicero's speeches show how elite oratory turned law into theater, where truth mattered less than persuasion and pedigree. If you appear without an advocate, you are already half convicted. If your advocate is mediocre, your odds drop further. The law promised equality before its benches, but delivered hierarchy in every verdict. Women navigated a parallel legal shadowland. Marriage cum manu gave fathers and husbands near total control over property and person. Divorce existed, but alimony and child custody favored male power. Rape of a free-born woman was a property crime against her father or husband, not a crime against her autonomy. Vestal virgins faced live burial for breaking chastity vows. Lesser women faced social death through gossip and ostracism. Elite women like Livia or Agrippina wielded influence through sons and husbands, but the law itself treated them as perpetual minors under male guardianship. Your sister, wife, or daughter enters this system and discovers that Roman justice weighs her half a citizen or less. The vigils offer no protection. Rome's police force doubled as firefighters, underfunded and overstretched. They patrolled at night, armed with clubs and whips, empowered to beat loiterers, drunks, suspected thieves. Extortion was routine. Pay the vigiles and walk free, refuse and face arrest on fabricated charges. Justice for sale was not corruption, it was administration. The urban cohorts, elite riot control, dispersed crowds with military precision, but rarely intervened in property crimes affecting the poor. You witness a theft in broad daylight. The vigiles arrive. They assess your status, your ability to pay. The thief goes free. You learn the first rule of Roman law. It polices downward, never upward. Treason trials exposed the system's zenith of terror. The Emperor Tiberius turned delation into sport. Informers denounced rivals for political gain, rewarded with 1/4 of the condemned man's estate. Trials became rituals where evidence was optional and torture universal. Sejanus, Tiberius's prefect, orchestrated purges that claimed dozens of senators, their families, their clients. Conviction required no defense, mere association sufficed. The Emperor Claudius executed citizens for opinions expressed at dinner parties. Law became weapon, weapon became theater, theater became precedent. You whisper criticism of a magistrate after too much wine. Someone hears, someone profits. The vigiles come at dawn. Even the law's mercy reveals its cruelty. The Emperor Trajan fed the poor through charity, not welfare, benevolence as propaganda, not right. Augustus's Lex Julia et Poppaea regulated marriage and procreation among the elite, penalizing celibacy with inheritance taxes while ignoring urban infertility caused by lead and malnutrition. Legal aid existed theoretically, but required patronage connections to access. The poor navigated law through intimidation and desperation, rarely through precedent or principle. Rome wrote 10,000 laws, but enforced the ones that preserved power. The rest existed for rhetorical flourish. By midday, some offense finds you: loitering, debt, a vigilist's bad morning. The law engages. It categorizes, it processes, it extracts what you cannot replace: time, blood, dignity. Roman law built the modern world but ground down the bodies that lived inside it. You entered seeking justice and exit carrying scars. The forum empties. The togas depart for lunch. The law sleeps, sated. Tomorrow it feeds again. The horns sound at dawn. You are not waking to bread or work. You are being chained. The hippodrome beneath the Colosseum, that labyrinth of tunnels, cages, elevators, and machinery that made Rome's spectacles possible, becomes your world now. You are not a spectator. You are the entertainment. Someone owns you, or fate has delivered you here. A criminal, a prisoner of war, a slave who crossed a line, a foreigner captured in some provincial rebellion. The crowd above numbers 50,000, hungry for blood before they break their fast. They did not come to see skill alone. They came to see suffering, to see men turned animal, to see the empire remind every citizen that their safety was purchased with other men's lives. The gates above will open soon. Your first fight waits. Preparation is clinical, almost tender in its efficiency. They strip you, oil your skin, fit you with armor that protects nothing vital, a mockery of military glory. The lanista, your trainer, assesses you not as a man but as material. Too weak for gladiator, perhaps best as damnatus, a condemned man given a sword but no expectation of victory. They hand you a weapon. It feels wrong in your untrained grip. The crowd wants authenticity, not perfection. They want to see fear, desperation, mistakes that end in blood. You are pushed toward the elevator, a wooden platform powered by chains and slaves below. The gate rises, light blinds you. The roar hits like a physical force, 50,000 voices unified in anticipation of your death. The sand burns your feet. The Emperor's box glitters across the arena, draped in purple, detached from the mathematics of mortality. You face your first opponent, another noob like you, eyes wild, grip shaking. The crowd chants morituri te salutant. We who are about to die salute you. They mean the fighters, but everyone knows the truth. Most will not see dusk. The referee signals. You circle. He lunges first, clumsy but committed. You dodge, swing wild, sand flies. The crowd roars approval at the chaos. Blood appears somewhere, yours or his, impossible to tell. Survival becomes singular. animal. The crowd becomes the true opponent, demanding spectacle above mercy. The trap of the games reveals itself between bouts. Victory buys nothing permanent. The emperor's thumb decides your fate regardless of skill. Even gladiators, the professional fighters trained for years, living in ludus barracks, bound by sacred oath, faced the same lottery. Priscus and Varus fought for 13 hours once, both wounded near death, both spared by mutual respect and imperial whim. Most were not so lucky. The crowd's mood shifted like weather. One moment cheering a clever parry, the next baying for the coup de grace when blood flowed. You win your first fight, they give you water, a rag for wounds. The next gate opens. A second opponent waits, better armed, more experienced. Fatigue is the real killer. Beasts enter the arena next. Not the famous venaciones with trained hunters, but the midday execution slot. Noxi, criminals too low for gladiatorial honor, fed to animals for public instruction. You draw the lions. They pace the tunnel, starved, smelling your fear sweat. The crowd wants terror, not technique. The keeper prods you forward. The cage opens. 200 pounds of muscle and teeth charge across sand that suddenly feels endless. You have no net, no trident, only the sword from your last fight, dulled by bone and cartilage. The first lion faints. The second leaps. Claws rake air inches from your face. The crowd's roar becomes white noise, then silence as you realize this is not theater. This is extinction. Women fight too, though rarely to the death. Amazon exhibitions thrill the crowd. Noble women playing warrior for sport, risking little. You are not noble. You are property. The Emperor Commodus fought in the arena himself, 365 times by his count, slaughtering beasts and cripples from a protected platform. He called it bravery. Rome called it entertainment. The line between spectator and spectacle blurred under such emperors. You survive the beasts somehow, a lucky thrust, a keeper's distraction. The crowd cheers your desperation. They throw coins, bread, insults. Victory means another fight tomorrow. Defeat means the cross outside the Porta Capena. The structure of the day itself weaponizes psychology. Morning, gladiator bouts, skilled combat between oath-bound professionals. Intermission, executions, the day's grim accounting of imperial justice. Afternoon, beast hunts, man against in staged savagery. Evening, final matches under torchlight when fatigue turns even veterans desperate. Each phase escalates the stakes, normalizes the violence, makes the abnormal feel inevitable. You are not merely fighting opponents. You are performing Rome's morality to 50,000 witnesses. Strength exalts, weakness destroys. The state arbitrates both. The crowd leaves sated, discussing favorite moments over Cena. You return to the Hippodrome, wounds untreated, tallying the cost of another day's survival. Behind the spectacle lies economics more ruthless than the arena. Gladiators cost money, recruitment, training, feeding, medical care. A skilled murmillo might fetch the price of a small farm. Condemned men like you cost nothing. The emperor funded games through provincial tribute, war spoils, confiscated estates. One triumph could bankroll 100 days of spectacles. The crowd received free grain, free entertainment, the illusion of participation through chants and gestures. Power flowed downward through controlled violence. You were never the point. You were the medium. Every thrust, every scream, every pool of sand-darkened blood reinforced that citizens ate because others died providing the grain, died entertaining the distraction, died maintaining the hierarchy. The psychological toll compounds across days. Gladiators developed superstitions, rituals, talismans, a lock of hair from a first love, a carved bone from a dead mentor. You have nothing. Dreams turn to arena sand, waking to blade edges. The crowd's faces blur into one judgment. Some gladiators earned fame, manumission, even citizenship. Most earned graves. The ludus became family, trainer father, fellow fighter brother, bonds forged in shared proximity to death. Betrayal cut deepest here. A glance away during sparring, a moment's hesitation in the arena, meant both died. Trust was not sentiment. It was survival arithmetic. Night falls. The Colosseum empties. 50,000 voices fade to echoes. You lie on straw that smells of blood and urine, wounds burning, muscles locked in anticipatory tension. Tomorrow repeats or ends. The emperor sleeps in silk. His prefect counts the take. Rome sleeps, dreaming of tomorrow's first kill. You do not sleep. You calculate odds, remember faces, opponent's eyes before the lunge, beast's breath before the leap, crowd's thousand mouths demanding more. The games were never about sport. They were about control. Every death taught citizenship. Obey, applaud, know your place above the sand, but grateful for the blood between you and chaos. You close your eyes. The horns will sound again. Dawn breaks cold on the muster field. You are not eating breakfast. You are being measured. The recruiter, a grizzled centurion with scars that map 2 decades of service, walks the line of young men gathered from villages, slums, and frontier towns, assessing height, build, teeth, eyes for weakness or disease. You are 16 or 17, poor enough that the legion's pay seems fortune, desperate enough that honor seems possible. Rome needs bodies. Germania threatens. Parthia watches. The eagle standard demands replacements. You step forward when called. He nods once. You are legionary material. Your civilian life ends here in mud and shouted Latin you barely understand. The first weeks break more than your body. Basic training at a castra, a fortified camp with precise geometry that will become your world, begins before sunrise with the Cornu's wail. You run 20 miles under full pack, 50 pounds of armor, weapons, rations, entrenching tools. The gladius drills until your shoulders scream, then continue. The pilum, heavy throwing spear, must fly true at 20 paces every time. Marching teaches you that roads exist because infantry hates mud. Digging teaches you that every camp becomes a fortress overnight. Ditches, palisades, watchtowers rising from wilderness by dusk. Failure means flogging. Flogging means the centurion's vine staff across your back until skin splits. Desertion means the cross. Discipline is the legion's true weapon. The centurion does not train you to fight. He trains you to obey when every survival instinct screams run. You learn to kill on command, die on command, march through rain that rots your boots while officers dine dry. The optio, second in command, walks behind the ranks with a stick, beating stragglers forward. The signifer carries the century's standard. Losing it means death for all. You learn formation, triple line, testudo turtle for missile protection, wedge for breakthrough. Individual courage impresses no one. The legion fights as one body, 20 centuries per cohort, 10 cohorts per legion, 6,000 men moving like fingers of one hand. One finger breaks, the hand still crushes. Your first campaign reveals war's administrative cruelty. You march 200 miles in 10 days, 20 miles daily, under summer sun that kills weaker men. Rations dwindle, hard tack, salted pork, Posca vinegar water that eats tooth enamel. Dysentery follows. Half your contubernium, the 8-man tent group that becomes family, shits blood by week's end. The enemy appears, barbarians painted blue, screaming from forest edge. Skirmishers loose arrows. You form line, shields locked, pila ready. The centurion screams advance. 3 paces, halt, throw, charge. Gladi rise and fall in mechanical rhythm. Blood sprays hot. Someone beside you falls screaming, hamstring cut. You keep formation. Stepping aside means decimation. Every 10th man clubbed to death by comrades. Victory means no rest. You dig victory camp while barbarians' wives wail over corpses, slaves taken in battle, women, children, warriors, march chained behind supply train. Rape is regulation, not crime. The Primus Pilus, 1st century's commander, claims first choice. You get what's left or nothing. Loot divides by rank. Gold talks to officers, iron to legionaries. The eagle advances. Tomorrow repeats. Parthia waits with horse archers who shoot through shields. Germania waits with endless forest ambushes. You are not conquering. You are grinding forward, one corpse, one camp, one dysentery shit mile at a time. Rome calls this glory. Winter quarters expose the quiet horror. Castra becomes semi-permanent, stone walls replacing wood. You build roads, bridges, aqueducts between campaigns, engineering as warfare's boring sequel. Centurions rotate. Your Primus Pilus takes bribes, beats tardiness from green replacements. Contubernium bonds harden. Marcus shares wine. Gaius covers your dice losses. Lucius guards your sleep when nightmares wake you swinging. Betrayal festers underneath. A file of auxiliaries, non-citizen troops from Gaul, Syria, Thrace, eye Roman grain rations with hunger. Fraternization means flogging. Desertion means crucifixion along the Rhenus, body rotting as warning. Mutiny simmers when pay delays. The legion elected its own leaders once during Republic chaos. Now emperors rule through prefects who care for compliance, not competence. You serve under Drusus, Germanicus, or some forgotten legate whose name history skips. Campaign against Cherushi ends in Teutoburg Forest disaster. 3 legions, 20,000 men, butchered in rain. Eagles captured. You survive because your legion guarded supply lines. Survivors return hollow-eyed, whispering of Varus's arrogance, Arminius's betrayal. Rome executes the messenger. You dig mass graves. The eagle's weight feels heavier. Injury accumulates like debt. The medicus binds wounds with vinegar-soaked linen, sets bones with splints. Camp followers, wives, whores, merchants, stitch tunics, cook, trade rumors of peace or emperor's death. Disease kills more than swords. Plague from corpses, fever from swamps. You lose teeth to scurvy. Joints swell from wet cold. The 20th year approaches. Legion service term under Augustus. Veterans receive land, cash, citizenship if auxiliary. Most die first. Those who survive return crippled. Lung scars from pila gashes, limp from pelvic fractures, nightmares that wake villages. Rome grants triumph. You grant silence. The eagle owns your soul. Standards captured mean national shame. Vespasian recovers 2 from Parthia after decades. You guard yours through Parthian cataphracts, Dacian false blades, Caledonian chariots. Each battle teaches adaptation. Longer pila against elephant charges, flaming arrows against wicker shields. Betrayal comes from within, a century decimated for cowardice. Your contubernium draws lots. Lucius clubs Marcus's skull while you hold shield wall. Tears come later, alone. The centurion nods approval. Weakness spreads. Dawn breaks again. Orders arrive. Rhine flood. New emperor. Parthian gold refused. You shoulder pack form column. Marcus's ghost walks beside you. The cornu wails. 20 miles today. The eagle glitters ahead. Rome needs bodies. You march. Sandals slap mud. Men fall, replaced instantly. The empire endures because you do not. 20 years or skull-cracked in Germania, your blood writes roads. Glory belongs to historians. Survival belongs to no one. You did not survive. No one like you did. The streets crushed your body with falling insulae. The hierarchy categorized you into invisibility. Food sustained just enough to labor, never enough to thrive. Disease claimed you slowly or suddenly. Law processed your complaints into silence. The arena took your blood for spectacle. The legion ground your bones into roads. Rome killed you before noon on your first day, or noon on your 35th year, or noon on the day you finally broke under weight no human frame was meant to carry. But your death was not the end of the story. It was the foundation. Every stone you died laying, every coin you died earning, every road you died paving, every grain you died harvesting. All of it built something that outlasted your name, your family, your century, your empire. Rome died. What Rome built endures. The paradox lands heaviest in the law you live under today. Roman law, the 12 tables that codify debt and property, the praetor's edict that shaped contracts, Justinian's 6th century digest that organized 2,000 years of jurisprudence into principles still taught in law schools, was never intended as universal justice. It protected creditors over debtors, patricians over plebeians, citizens over slaves, property over persons. The same system that allowed crucifixion as testimony extraction, that treated women as legal minors, that made torture a procedural requirement for certain witnesses, also gave us the concept of persona standi, legal standing, the right to be heard in court, adversarial procedure, innocent until proven guilty, contracts as sacred between consenting parties. You curse Roman brutality, but cite Roman precedent. The law that would have flogged you now structures your mortgage. Language carries the same invisible inheritance. You speak words Rome minted from Latin, words for Senate, Republic, Empire, citizen, soldier, road, aqueduct, forum, basilica. University derives from universitas, the medieval guild of teachers Rome's cathedral schools evolved into. Algebra came through Arabic translators, but the Roman numeral system you still see on clocks shaped Europe's accounting until the Renaissance. Even your insults, Cretan from Christian, moron from Greek via Latin, traced to Rome's taxonomic cruelty. The empire spoke one language to administer 3 continents. You inherit that efficiency, that arrogance, that ability to make the world legible to centralized power. Every email you send crosses fiber optic cables laid along viae publicae routes. Every government form demands your status like a Roman census. Architecture wears Rome's signature most visibly. The dome of the Pantheon, still the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built, taught Brunelleschi the Pantheon was not merely a building, it was a proof. Concrete, pozzolana ash mixed with lime and aggregate. Let Rome span rivers, enclose basilicas, erect monuments that mocked gravity. You walk through arches daily, in bridges, train stations, bank lobbies, all echoing triumphal arches that glorified murderers as benefactors. The grid cities you inhabit descend from Castra, legionary camps stamped across Germania and Dacia with military precision. Zoning laws, public squares, civic centers, all Roman. The skyscraper returns to insulae logic, stack bodies vertically to conquer space. Rome's engineering was never sentimental. It was thermodynamic. Build what works, collapse what doesn't, repeat. Governance carries Rome's structural DNA. Representative democracy descends from the Roman Republic's comitia, assemblies where property-owning males voted by block, not head. Senate means old man in Latin, still naming upper chambers from Washington to Canberra. Executive power, veto, imperium, all Roman. Checks and balances traced to late Republic crisis when consuls, tribunes, and Senate clashed over who ruled the corn dole. Clientelism never died. Modern pork barrel spending echoes patronage, where senators bought votes with grain, circuses, tax breaks. Even fascism wore Roman cosplay. Mussolini's eagle standards, marble forums, SPQR on fasces. Republics fall to strongmen. Rome proved the pattern 2 millennia ago. Your ballot box evolved from tabellaria urns. Your filibuster from senatorial obstruction. Economics internalized Rome's ruthless calculus. Centralized grain supply, the annona that fed 1 million without supermarkets, prefigured welfare states, price controls, ration cards, state monopolies on salt, iron, mining-funded armies that became bureaucracies. Taxation by census had standardized revenue extraction across provinces. Money as state power. Sesterces backed by military dominance became fiat currency, central banks, IMF conditionality. Slavery's abolition changed nothing fundamental. Wage labor reproduces much of its logic without chains. You work 8 hours for rent, Rome would recognize as insulae extortion. Productivity metrics descend from gangway quotas in Egyptian grain fleets. The firm, as legal person, Societas Publicanorum tax farmers, became the corporation. Military carries Rome's tactical genius forward. Combined arms, legion heavy infantry, auxilia cavalry and archers, artillery ballistae, remains NATO doctrine. Logistics win wars. Rome's supply trains across Sahara and Scottish bogs taught modern generals that amateurs discuss tactics while professionals discuss beans. Professional standing army under state control replaced citizen militias everywhere from France's tercios to America's Continental Line. Decimation as discipline survives in broken square executions. Total war. Germania campaigns that exterminated tribes, salted earth, prefigures Sherman, Dresden, Hiroshima. Peace through strength was not Reagan. It was Augustus after Actium. Your drones evolved from Roman firepots. Your satellites map like Roman itineraria. Culture internalized Rome's spectacle economy. Bread and circuses, panem y circenses, explains elections, Super Bowls, Netflix binges. Public violence declined, but private sadism exploded. Reality TV, slasher films, video games where you play gladiator. Colosseum psychology endures, catharsis through proxy suffering. Hero worship never died. From gladiatorial graffiti to Instagram influencers, fame remains bloodsport by other means. Stoicism as self-help traces to Seneca's letters, Epictetus's handbook, slave philosophy for citizen endurance. Roman taste shaped canon, Virgil over Homer in medieval schools, Livy over Herodotus. Even Christianity, Rome's state religion by Theodosius, structured church hierarchy, papal primacy, sacramental law on Roman models. The deepest inheritance cuts psychologically. Rome taught civilization as domination, barbarians, slaves, probability itself through engineering hubris. You inherit that confidence, climate-controlled, vaccinated, connected, expecting mastery over chaos. Hierarchy as natural order persists, CEOs as modern senators, influencers as clients, algorithms as vigils sorting worth. Irony of progress. Rome's cruelty built your comfort, but comfort breeds softness Rome would decimate. Average life expectancy, 35 then, 80 now, but happiness surveys show moderns no happier. Rome endured 12 centuries by killing weakness. You medicate it. Their aqueducts still flow. Your infrastructure crumbles. You sit in climate control, scrolling news of imperial decline. America, Europe, China, whoever plays Rome now. Borders weaken, elites insulate, masses demand bread, meaning circuses. History rhymes because Rome wrote the meter. The system crushed you daily but built cathedrals of stone and law that outlasted bones. You survive where you stood because slaves dug foundations, legionaries poured concrete, engineers calculated spans while you choked on dust. Rome's genius was never moral. It was thermodynamic. Extract maximum order from maximum suffering. Your world runs on that engine still. Comfort costs. Rome made you pay up front. You pay in deferred maintenance, cultural rot, elite capture. The aqueduct still stands. Your pension might not.